Dear students, and welcome to this lecture on convergence of evolution of tree habit in Gymnosperms, Monocotyledons and Dicotyledons. So, for the outline of this lecture is concerned, we will begin with as to what exactly we mean by convergent evolution, followed by the discussion of tree habit and its evolutionary importance, and then we will talk specifically about convergent evolution of tree habit and subsequently evidences in support of the convergence of arborescence or tree habit in Gymnosperms, Monocotyledons and Dicotyledons will be discussed. And we will conclude with some evolutionary and ecological factors that promote convergence of tree habit in Gymnosperms, Monocotyledons and Dicotyledons. So, dear students, let us begin with what exactly we mean by convergent evolution. In evolutionary biology, convergent evolution is the process whereby organisms not closely related, that means not monophyletic, independently evolve similar traits as a result of having to adapt to similar environments or ecological niches. Hence, convergent evolution occurs when organisms from different evolutionary lineages evolve similar adaptations to similar environmental conditions. This can happen even when organisms are very widely separated geographically. For instance, evolution of succulent water storing stems in response to desert conditions of Cactaceae, what commonly you call as the cactus family of the Americas, and the euphorbs or Euphorbiaceae, what you commonly call as the spurge family of South Africa generally, provides a classical example of convergent evolution. Similarly, the evolution of eyes for sight of vertebrates and insects and evolution of wings for flying of birds and bats are also examples of convergent evolution. Now, after having understood what we exactly mean by convergent evolution, we also need to know what exactly we mean by a tree. A tree refers to any perennial plant with a permanent, woody, self-supporting main or major trunk, ordinarily growing to a considerable height and usually developing branches at some distance above the ground. In fact, all plants ever considered to be trees are vascular plants, tracheophytes, except prototaxites, which is a 9 meter in height, almost tree-like holobasidiomycete or lichen that dominated the land flora almost 350 to 400 million years ago. Dear students, trees, irrespective of their taxonomic identities, share features such as indefinite and flexible growth, modular structure, lack of clear separation between germline and soma, reversible cellular differentiation, great phenotypic plasticity and physiological tolerance, and of course presence of haploid and diploid multicellular generations. Tree habit has evolved in a wide range of unrelated plants. It really provides a superb example of convergent evolution, mainly for the purpose of gaining height to get maximum light by the plants. Evolution of trees can be better understood with due consideration to all these kinds of aspects and attributes. In fact, the tree habit involves many rather than few phenotypic attributes and provides an excellent example of molding of entire phenotype in response to the selection pressures. An interesting question, however, is as to what are these selection pressures in response to which tree habit evolves as a collective response of all the phenotypic features. Dear students, tree growth habit has been achieved by numerous plant lineages and is almost invariably associated with biochemical traits that favor the elevation, display of photosynthetic and reproductive organs, and so on. Arguably, convergence among so many different plant lineages for many biochemical traits instead of only one or few important ones lends strong support to the assertion that these traits are the result of the adaptive evolution and not just accidental expression of what you call as diffusive evolution. Paradoxically, trees have very high level of genetic diversity but low nucleotide substitution rates and low speciation rates as well. From an evolutionary standpoint, trees are also known to combine high local differentiation for adaptive traits with extensive gene flow. Moreover, exceptional maintenance of species integrity in the face of abundant interspecific gene flow seems to be the rule rather than an exception in case of trees. Though the works pertaining to the evolutionary consequences of the tree habit date back to as early as 1950s, the works of Stebbins way back in 1950s and 1958, then in 1974, followed by Grant. The earlier perceptions that considered life history traits and reproductive characteristics of plants as an integrated set of attributes contributing to adjusting levels of genetic diversity to the ecological demand seems to have almost lost popularity on ground. The new developments in the areas of phylogenetics, aided by other powerful analytical tools, greatly help to revisit these earlier perceptions. In fact, the multiple origins of trees actually facilitated such type of work, as each distinct tree lineage could be viewed as an independent evolutionary experiment to obtain useful insights into evolutionary dynamics of typical tree features such as tallness, longevity, and fecundity, and so on. Let's now very specifically discuss the evidences that are there in support of the convergence of tree habit in Gymnosperms, Monocots, and Dicots. Dear students, multiple lineages have evolved independently a growth form of a single woody stem with branching beginning at a distance above the ground that characterizes trees. It's now believed beyond any doubt that Paleozoic tree forms of club mosses, horsetails, and seed plants, Cycads and the Gymnosperms, they evolved independently, which is a very important point. Some evolutionary theorists even conclude that the flowering plant lineages began entirely herbaceous, having lost the capacity to become trees, and then later on re-evolved arborescence or tree habit in many different lineages. For instance, the distinctive tree form of flowering palm trees, characterized by a single apical growing point and pith rather than wood in the stem, is outwardly similar to that of the completely unrelated cycads, which are of Jurassic origin, you must be knowing, and of the even older tree ferns, which first developed this form in the Paleozoic and did so in a variety of ways. It's here very pertinent to mention that both cycads and tree ferns are still alive and are found in the tropical and subtropical regions of the world. Since tree habit involves many rather than few phenotypic attributes in which entire phenotype is molded in response to selection pressures, understanding such pressures, as mentioned earlier as well, is an interesting and important discourse for sure. Habitats that favor luxuriant growth of plants may permit the tree growth habit, though they do not necessarily select arborescent growth form. However, tree growth habit has been achieved by numerous plant lineages and is almost invariably associated with biochemical traits that favor the evolution, display of photosynthetic and reproductive organs, and so on. Convergence among so many different plant lineages for many biochemical traits, as I said earlier on as well instead of one, lends strong support to the assertion that these traits are the result of adaptive evolution and not just accidental expression of the diffuse evolution, as I mentioned earlier on. Dear students, the range of trees found in different plant groups include ferns, that is the pteridophytes, conifers and their allies, that is the gymnosperms, and flowering plants, the angiosperms. Tree ferns fall in the family Cycads, which are rarely branched, possessing no true bark, though have a trunk with woody strands. These tree ferns generally occur in frost-free, shady habitats. Amongst gymnosperms, more than 600 tree species occur in three families, which include Equisetaceae, and this Equisetaceae mainly includes cypress and the junipers, then Pinaceae, which includes pines, spruces, even the lurches, hemlocks, firs, cedars, and so on. And then Taxodiaceae, what we also call as redwoods, and Taxads with about 20 species, and Ginkgo with just one species, that is the Ginkgo biloba, and Cycads, palm-like trees, and needles with few interesting woody plants are other gymnosperms which exemplify the tree habit or provide examples of the tree habit. In case of angiosperms, amongst the dicotyledons, about 75% of the world's almost 180 families contain trees. In contrast, in monocotyledons, a wide-ranging set of trees are concentrated in just few families such as Palmaceae, Agaveaceae, Pandanaceae, Liliaceae, and Xanthorrhoeaceae, and of course also Steliaceae. Dear students, phenotypic correspondence among unrelated species provides useful clues and strong circumstantial evidence in favor of the adaptive evolution, because it reflects that organisms differing in genetic and developmental capabilities can potentially converge on a comparable solution to the exigencies of life when confronted with the same or very similar selection pressures. And arborescence or tree growth form is the best example for this kind of understanding or statement. Dear students, as stated earlier, arborescence species or woody species or tree-like species are found in many families of flowering and non-flowering plants. Gigantic, tall and branched dicot tree species such as chinar, as we have here around, the Platanus orientalis, oak, maple, and gymnosperm trees like pines, fir, and spruce are spectacular sights not only in our Kashmir Himalayan region but in other regions of the world, including North America and Europe as well. Regardless of their differences in terms of size, shape, volume, and reproductive strategies, the trunks of the flowering plants and gymnosperms all share the same basic developmental pathway and mature anatomical construction. One of the best examples of convergent evolution in tree habit is between cycads, tree ferns, both of which are gymnosperms but unrelated, and palms, that's monocotyledons. These three apparently unrelated groups share also with another extinct gymnosperm group, I mean the Benititails, the spiral arrangement of leaves, the habit, I mean a more or less hemispherical crown on top of an unbranched stem, and the lack of secondary wood growth. The branching pattern and habit of arboreal dicotyledons, such as oaks for instance, is very similar to that of some gymnosperms such as Ginkgo biloba and many conifers. But let me tell you that it is very hard at times to ascribe this to convergent evolution, mainly for two major reasons. Number one, that tree habit is not only determined by genes but is at least in part the result of environmental conditions. For example, independently of the species, trees growing tightly packed in a forest tend to have tall, slender crowns, whereas the crowns of the more or less isolated trees tend to be wider. Second reason, the genes responsible for tree architecture are not still well characterized. So, we cannot be very sure if the similar habit of say Ginkgo and oak is derived or an ancestral trait. In fact, the world branching of some other conifers, I mean firs and the Arecaceae members, is convergent with that of the Equisetaceae, but the only arboreal species of that group are now extinct. Dear students, in spite of their lack of avascular cambium, some monocots, for example Yucca, Aloe, Dracena and Cordyline, nevertheless can become trees through increase in stem diameter by a novel process which is usually termed as anomalous secondary growth. In this case, plants are able to add new vascular bundles and parenchyma to the primary body, thus increasing their girth, as you might have read in your other courses of botany. Other monocot trees such as palms belonging to the family Arecaceae, screw pines, Pendaceae and bananas, Musaceae, are incapable of adding new bundles. Thus, in strict sense, these trees are merely overgrown herbs. The root system of the monocots, and also distinctive in that the radical aborts at an early stage and the root system of the adult plant develops adventitiously. So, dear students, we can in summary say that, so far this lecture is concerned, we had a brief description of the convergent evolution to begin with, which was followed by the overview of the characteristics of tree habit and its evolutionary implications, and finally we talked about the evidences in support of the convergent evolution in tree habit in gymnosperms, monocotyledons and dicotyledons. And if you try to have a quick glance on this, you know, evolutionary convergence is the recurrent tendency of biological organizations to arrive at the same solution to a particular need. It's a very crux point for you to understand. And the essence of the convergent evolution is that the same biological functions evolve independently more than once. Since you know that tree basically refers to a perennial plant with a permanent woody self-supporting main stem or trunk, ordinarily that grows to a considerable height and usually develops branches at some distance above the ground. And these trees or this tree habit provides the best example of convergent evolution. In fact, as I said earlier, the tree habit involves many rather than just few phenotypic attributes and provides an excellent example of molding of the entire phenotype in response to the selection pressures. Hope you have understood it well. With this, I take your leave now until we meet in the next lecture.